by far a moment in time that I will never replicate. So it was a great honor, and it's definitely the highlight of my career.
I'm so honored to have the one and only Eric Liedtke with me today. I'm happy to talk with you about leadership, about communication, and of course also presentations. So we take the next minutes to dive into these topics. I saw you many times on stage, and for me you are one of the best business communicators I've ever seen. So it's really nice to have you here today. Let's go back to the beginning. Do you remember your very first presentation?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the kind words. I'm humbled by them, and I hope somehow I can live up to them, but I appreciate you saying them nonetheless. Yeah, I think, you know, as an American growing up in the States, we had this thing called show and tell. So as I try to think about my first presentation, I can't remember one in particular, but we often, on a regular basis, a monthly basis, had to stand in front of the class and present your favorite toy or your favorite stuffed animal or whatever you had in your possession, and you'd have to learn how to describe it and talk about why it's your favorite thing, et cetera, et cetera. So you immediately get at a very young age, I would say first grade, second grade, you get used to presenting things that you love and get used to being in front of people and trying to tell an interesting story, even as a 7-year-old.
7-year-old, that's very early, right? So
I think it's just natural. That's what the American schools, at least when I grew up in the 70s, were harping on. So
nice. And your first business presentation, can you remember it, or is it too long?
No, 1994. I started with Adidas, so a long time ago, and I think the first business presentation I had was a product presentation to a guy named Tim Geis. Don't know where you are, Tim, but hello. He was a buyer for Champs shoes and as part of the Foot Locker group. And I think I did a terrible job of trying to present and trying to not be nervous and stutter and everything else. But you got to start somewhere, and it was fun, but it was definitely humbling.
What were your first mistakes at your first presentation? What do you think?
I think not only that one, but also when I may have stood in front of bigger crowds. I think you try to be over rehearsed, you try to be perfect, you try to be somebody you're not in something you've read about, and you start to get in this world of trying to be perfect. And I've learned through many mistakes that there is no such thing as perfect, and most times audiences will get on your side by being a little bit more self-deprecating and actually having fun with your imperfections. So
yeah, since then I think you've been on many stages since your first ever business presentation. What do you think what was your biggest stage?
Biggest by size, I think, was probably some of the global brand conferences we did at adidas, and I'd say those were anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 people, depending on the year or the season that we were trying to launch. So maximum's probably 4,000 people I've presented to, which is rather large, I guess. It all depends on the facility. I think you were there in Bamberg, yeah, which was probably the biggest one.
What do you think? What was your most important stage you ever had? I saw pictures you presenting in New York, yeah, in front of the United Nations. Yeah, was this something like
100%? I don't think I don't think you can say, yeah, you can top that. I think to back up, I think the most important presentations are also the most meaningful to you. It's not just about staying on stage and delivering a message. I think the audience feels it when you feel the content. And, you know, I just know that people I value and I see, or, you know, whether it's like Robert Kennedy's speech after Martin Luther King was shot. It was spontaneous. It was on the back of a pickup truck, and it was from the heart, and he felt it in the audience. You know, it's like some of these more historical speeches that you can go through the chronicles and look at. Those are the ones that make the most impact, because the audience feels that the presenter is feeling it. And yes, of course, the United Nations was a tremendous platform, but the topic of trying to solve the problem of ocean plastic and the crisis that we were facing was so passionate to me as a waterman, as a sportsman, and that loves the water and the oceans. it resonated for me, regardless of who I was talking to. But then if you magnify it with the General Assembly of the United Nations, and it's like, okay, this is by far a moment in time that I will never replicate. So it was a great honor, and it's definitely the highlight of my career.
Where do you get your inspiration from, especially for keynotes or communication?
It's different, right? So from a presentation standpoint, the content has to drive the story, and I think content is king. So you have to, whether it's a business situation or it's a political situation or it's an environmental situation or whatever it is, you have to talk about what your content is, what your purpose is of that presentation, and build around it. So usually the world at large, or the consumer in the adidas world, would drive a lot of my content as far as what we were trying to do to win the consumer. So that's what would inspire me, is like, what are the current events? So if I were to do a presentation on today, I certainly would have to talk about the magnitude of the pandemic, how the consumer is dealing with that in different places, what their fears are, what their hopes are, what their dreams are, and how adidas would, through the power of sport, address some of those things. And I think you can also look at Black Lives Matter and the pain that's coming through that, and the recognition of all lives, and how basically we've failed to in our march to equality, to really rise all boats on one tide. And I think you'd have to look at that. And I think you have to always look at, the sustainability, the carbon footprint. So those type of inspirational points that are happening in the world today is what you'd have to inform any presentation you gave, because that's a backdrop in everyone's lives. And then from style, you take inspiration from lots of things. I'm obsessed with watching other presenters and other great storytellers. I get inspiration from history. I get inspiration from plays, from TV shows, from movies, any great storytellers, podcasts.
Are there specific personalities you would say these are really people, they inspire me, like Martin Luther King, or I don't know?
Yeah, I think there's the expected, okay,
Is there a special one
Nelson
for you?
Mandela, Barack Obama, JFK, Robert Kennedy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, Winston Churchill. Those are the names that come up with all the great speeches when you buy those books. And of course, you have to start with those. Those are the classics. But then, I'm moved by, how Hamilton the play came together, and like the George Washington's farewell speech, and how he plugged that real content into it, and how he told that story. I mean, I'll bet if you take a poll, and if people admit it, 95% of the world didn't know who Alexander Hamilton was before that play. And now nobody can stop talking about it, especially since it's just streamed on Disney. So to me, it's like, you can take inspiration from all those guys and how they storytell. And I think that's always interesting. The one guy that everybody talks about is the presentation master, Steve Jobs himself. I haven't gotten chills from Steve. I mean, I've watched all his stuff, and I love the way he's kind of done it and his perfectionism, but it wasn't something that ever resonated with me. And I don't want to be, purposely controversial, but that's just, everybody's got a different role model, if you will.
Are you still nervous getting on stage?
I think nerves come from nervousness comes from a variety of different areas. I think nervousness is, yes, to say, yeah, I think you need to be nervous. You get nervous before any competition, because you want to win, you want to do well, you want to be recognized as being someone that's communicated well, told a good story, inspired people, moved people to do something, take action. I think anytime you stand in front, you're looking for there's the desired intent of action at the end. And if you can do that every time, then you better be nervous, because that requires you to bring your game in great fashion. But I don't get nervous walking up on a stage with lights. I get nervous that I've got to perform, and I've got to make sure that I achieve what I set out to do.
Is it right that you went into the gym right in front of getting onto the big stages, like on a GBC, or was it just a joke?
I would always train before I presented. I mean, because I think,
right.
Because it helps you calm. I mean, I think listen, if I'm not doing sport, haven't done sport or about to do sport, I'm not happy anyway. So I think what I find in sport is my meditative world, and I think it allows you to get inside yourself and think about what you're about to do and think about your objectives and ground down. And sometimes the endorphins help to release creativity as well. So you come up with things in different ways of presenting, and I constantly am editing, and most of my presentations are well scripted, but also mixed with a healthy dose of freestyling. And I think that's something I really like to do, because it keeps it fresh for me, which means it keeps it fresh for the audience. If you're too rehearsed, you come across a little mechanical, a little robotic, and you read. And I don't think that's good for you or them. And I'm always about everything I try to do as a presenter is try to put myself in the shoes of the audience, and how are they going to receive this? And they're going to have a lot more fun if I'm having fun. And if I'm being more creative and sport helps me release that creativity, then I'm going to be more relaxed and more on point.
Nice. Let's dive into your methods. Like, how are you developing presentations? Do you have a standard process you go every time? Is it the same, or is it different? Or
I think I have different presentation styles, I guess formats, but I would say I always try to have the same style, and that style is to be super authentic, and that means you've got to write yourself. I mean, I think anybody that has anybody write a speech for them, I mean, they're better than I am if they can come across authentically. But
you need to connect with your speech again, so it's difficult if you don't write it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to own it. You have to own your words.
Yes.
And you have to then be able to freestyle off those words to be more spontaneous on stage, which also allows you to make a joke, or be self-deprecating in certain areas, or have the audience come along with you because it's meaningful to you. And I think as a presenter, you owe that to the audience to play that back. It's got to come from someplace. And if you study actors, and I've studied some that I really like, they say the same thing. You've got to be in character. You have to be the character. If you're trying to pretend to be something, it's like it comes across robotic. So I think it's the same thing. People resonate with people who are themselves. And so the first thing I do is I have to write it, which means I try to start early in the process, because writing takes a lot of editing, and it takes a lot of going back and making sure, fine-tuning it, and making sure it's down to its crystallized to its best point. So that requires a lot of preparation. And early on, I would rehearse a lot. I don't rehearse now because I feel like it makes me stale, but I would prepare myself. So I would rehearse religiously, and I think there's
you meditate with the presentation also, right?
Yeah, so like you have to, if you write it, then it's yours, and then you just have to bring it across as you want it. But I think I would say the rehearsing in front of the mirror, the standard way of people tell you, I'm not doing that anymore. But some people do it. I did it. I think it made me better as a young presenter. I think now it would make me a little bit too mechanical. I think what I found is I'm better when I'm a little bit more spontaneous. So I'd say write your own stuff, prepare that's best for you and your style. And I have a lot of respect for non-native speakers, because to present in an English or foreign language, I can't even imagine. You would never see me present in German. It would be very robotic and very ugly. So, and that's why I whenever somebody's speaking to me in a foreign language, it's like, I'm so impressed, but again, the more honest they can be about that, the more fun they can have about it. I think the more connections they make with the audience.
Also with the weakness you have, maybe.
Yeah. To me, one of my secrets I've always used, it's not much of a secret, but if I'm going to make a joke, it's going to be at my own expense. You never try to make a joke on somebody else's expense. Self-deprecation immediately gets the audience on your side. It's like they come back to you. And even like Dave Chappelle, and I love Dave Chappelle as a comedian.
Yes.
He's super self-deprecating.
Right.
I just watched him the other day.
Love him.
He described his life like an above-ground pool. And it's like, he goes, it's a pool, but so I think you get inspired from guys who are that real. And I think that's always fun to try to pull that and say, how would I do that?
You told me about 3 categories you have.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more?
Those are more, I think as a manager, leader, you have to be presenting. You have to be communicating through spoken word. And it goes back to our storytelling of our ancestors before we had printing presses and all the other modern innovations that have moved us forward. The storyteller was the the principal communicator at the tribe, at the fire, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's still true in us as a species. I think we still want to be told a good story. So I think any leader needs to be that storyteller. It needs to be able to lead through his or her words and communicate frequently. So then you have to have a repetition built in. So what I did is I was on the board at Adidas. I tried to have 3 different styles of presentations. One would be to a very large audience of up to 2,000 to 4,000 people. That would be pretty highly scripted because there was so much background, whether it be videos or lights or other speakers involved, that everybody had to know kind of where you were going. So that was probably 80% scripted, 20% freestyle, but I always made sure the teleprompter and the people knew that if I left it, I'd come back. Just wait for me. But that was probably my most polished because you had so many people depending and you didn't want to really lose your connection, your path to the presentation. That happened twice a year. Then we had what we called seasonal kickoffs, which were much more hardworking content presentations. The big ones were more almost inspiring and getting people. They were short, they were snappy, but they were high production, high videos, getting people excited about the sales product they had to launch. The next one was more, hey, we got to start the creation process. Let's get people educated on the current state of the market, state of play, and then let's get where we need to go for the next 6 months of creation. So that becomes a more content-rich presentation, and that would take, an hour or so versus 15 minutes of the other one. That would really dive into the detail and the content, and that became very much PowerPoint-driven and non-scripted. And I would just talk to each slide, and it would be well rehearsed from content, but not well scripted. So I would know the content inside and out, and I'd be able to talk to it and say why it was important. And each slide had to have a real reason for being. If every slide didn't have its own objective, what I was trying to communicate, then the slide wouldn't make it. And so that was twice a year. So that's 4 times a year now I'm in front of the troops. And then we threw on another quarterly update, which was every 90 days. And those 90 days became more of Eric Unplugged, if you would. I would stand on a stage with just a whiteboard with no slides and just talk about what was going on. And it was me at my most transparent, my most accessible, but also my most vulnerable. So it was trying to address issues that were in the business, issues that were in the culture, issues that were in the world, and try to lead by how I was viewing things and letting them know what I was doing about those different issues and what I was going to do, not just what I've done the last 90 days, but what are the next 90 days. And I kind of took that page from some of the high-tech companies that are communicating on regular, even every Friday. I think Google or Facebook has a town hall. I thought that was a little too much, but I thought every 90 days was a nice rhythm, and it did play back nicely in a lot of our internal measurements, as far as if you call it internal scores. That always came back to say, please keep that going, because it felt like people could be in touch with where management was thinking and what management was thinking about and how they were addressing it. And if they disagreed, then they had an opportunity to come up and speak, not at that format, but later on they could approach me in a more informal way. So that was another 4 times. So now you've got 4 times 4. So you're basically at about 8 times a year of scheduled presentations, and then you throw in another 20 or 30 that you're just doing off different needs. And that was kind of like the regular drumbeat of being in front of the employees. And I think that's what leadership needs to do. They need to be present. They need to be accessible, and especially times like today. It's like, how do you do that while you're being remote? How is management and how is leadership really speaking to their employees and their team and setting the culture by example and doing that? And I think that's a challenge for future presenters, as far as in a COVID world and a work from home world, what does that look like? And it's a challenge for all of us going forward.
Let's talk about leadership. Thanks for your insights so far. I think I saw many of the high-level presentations you gave with huge audience, and my feeling was that you've been able to create a strong company momentum with these events. So it was like something of a very strong leadership tool for you to get on these big stages and to move the company into a specific direction you want to go with them. Is that right? Can you just bring us into your thoughts on that, and how important is leadership and leadership communication because this was also always very impressive for me. So
I again appreciate the words, but communication is the key to life. I say that to my daughter. I say that to my children. I say that to my wife. If you're not communicating and having a dialogue, you're not going to succeed in anything you're trying to do. So I just apply that to work. And I think, yeah, when you're on that stage, you better be communicating something that's meaningful to the audience. You better be leading them towards a better future. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time and theirs. And so you've got to get up there and you got to have a plan and you got to have a strategy and you have to have a vision and you have to have a point of view that is based on your best instincts and your best logic and your best gut, right? So I think, and the best ones come from your heart, but you've got to lead with that. And I had the great fortune of being with Adi for 26 years. And the last 6 years I was a board member. So I've done every job at Adi I can imagine. From my first job was a sweeper, and then I came up to be a product manager, and then I became up to be a assistant category manager, and then so whatever the job titles were. But the idea was, I grew up, I was one of the audience, and I saw what great looked like, and I saw what not so great looked like. And so I tried to role model the great and try to forget the not so great. And that led me to be the leader I was. And I hope history judges me kindly. I mean, I appreciate you taking the time and saying the words, but only time will tell, right? So we had a good run. I'll say that. Whether that was luck or skill, I mean, I think it takes a little bit of both. I'm retired. No, I'm gonna commit the rest of my life to making the world a better place. And I've been super fortunate in my life to work for Adi and have success at Adi, and the things I've been able to learn and see, and the people I've met has been, I feel humbled, honored, and just blessed. But now I need to give back, and I think I'm in that age and that time where I need to make sure that I'm doing what I can to make the world a better place, through purpose-driven missions. And my first one and my most passionate one, I learned when I was at Adi, which is, how do we battle the problem of plastic waste in general, and as a consequence, carbon footprint. And I think those are things I can uniquely get into because I've been able to drive some innovations. I've worked with people who are innovators and material scientists. I think I can add some expertise to that, and obviously I'm going to add as much horsepower as I can to it, just from sheer efforts. But I don't know if I'll do that from starting a company, joining a company. Who knows? But right now it's only been 6 months, and I'm enjoying time with the family.